stories help us build community, maintain community, and destroy community. And so they are extremely powerful at the micro level with our roommates or families, although family doesn't feel micro very often, to every level of community that we can think about. And so I think the pandemic has only heightened that recognition in some ways. I think because we are all struggling, or at least I have been, to think about narratives. There's so much uncertainty, there's so much confusion. All those narrative arcs that I counted on in my job, my family, my life are sort of hanging fire, and it's been really difficult. But I do think what we do is inherently really important, and I believe what I said a few minutes ago, that this is really the golden era, at least as long as I've been alive, for the narrative arts. And I think not just in American culture, but across the globe. The internet has given everybody access to more communities, more publishing opportunities, more readers, and also different forms. And I am no TikTok person. Is anybody a TikTok maven on here? Well, that's the latest storytelling tool that has caught fire and can be both informative, but also be used in lots of other different ways. That said, these good old things are still one of the great technologies of human beings, and they also remain important. As somebody said to me yesterday, nothing handles human interiority like fiction and prose on the page. We can talk about film, we can talk about video games, we can talk about all these other modes, but this codex is still extraordinarily powerful. So that's the context in which I hope we will be together today for a little while. We're gonna spend most of our time on an exercise, so I'm gonna read maybe 3 pages from my novel, Scribe. And the only reason I'm doing that is because it's an example of what we're gonna talk about today, which is stranger comes to town and asks for a favor, which is one of the big triggers for storytelling in lots of different cultures, not just Western ones, although it has a tremendous history here in the American West, in complicated and fraught ways, but also some pretty powerful ways too. So I thought it might be a little bit relevant that way. So I'm going to read, we're going to talk about the exercise I sent you. We're going to take about 30 minutes for you guys to write a page or to start the exercise, which is in essence, you identifying a community, fictional or real, and having a stranger approach a member of that community and ask for a favor. In the context of thinking about this as a way to trigger a story, short or long. We'll come back, share those sort of formats, whatever we've come up with, whatever big asks you guys have framed. And then we'll spend the rest of our time just generally talking about fiction, publishing, school, the wind in Nebraska versus the wind in Wyoming, because I think I got you guys on that. Whatever you want to talk about. So does that sound okay? Does anybody have questions at the outset? Is the technology working okay? I'm counting a little bit on Matt to help me with the chat. I'm pretty good at, I have some Zoom experience. What I found out is if you're running the console, you know, if you're basically running the ship, it can also be hard to respond to people's questions as deeply as you want because you're kind of being a driver. So just let me know and raise your hands physically or via the chat, whatever you want. So does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns before we launch? I know you guys are probably a little butt numb by today. So, okay, I'm gonna read a little bit just from Scribe and talk a little bit about writing. So when Matt originally got in touch with me, I thought I might read some of my very, very recent work. Writing has been hard the last 6 months, but I've been doing a little bit of it. It's been very up and down. It has come out I feel like I've been most successful in really, really short stories, which is a form that I didn't used to practice in. I've written short fiction for a long time now, 40 years probably. I started when I was in college. But I didn't do flash until 3-4 years ago. And these sort of not realistic flash pieces started coming out every now and again, and I just let them roll. One of the things I've learned is not to question too much. If I get stuck, read or take a walk. But if something's going to come out that looks like I shouldn't be doing it, I have to just give it some space, not over control it. So I have to continue to write those. Some of them are pretty tart and biting, and I wasn't sure that was a great tone for today. So if you have questions about those, I can talk about it. The other thing I've been doing is working on a novel, which I have found also extremely difficult in the past few months. I'm not somebody who finds writing easy, but I'm pretty steady. Get to the desk 4, 5, 6, 7 days of the week, all year round. And I have a lot of days when I write poorly, but I don't have a ton of days when I get stuck. And this is something about what's going on now has just been stucky for me. So I've resorted to one of my time-tested ways of getting unstuck, which is borrowing shamelessly from old family stories. I was raised in Southwest Virginia on a farm, and in an oral white storytelling culture, Scotch, Irish, Appalachian. And this book I'm going to read from Scribe is pretty much 100% from that culture. And so I have just started pilfering old family stories and airdropping them into this novel manuscript that I'm working on in the hope of finding some kind of truth. And I do think, although I'm a fiction writer who makes up most of the stuff I do, I heard the great work you guys did earlier today. And things that really happen to you, or stories that families share over and over and over again, there's some essential truth about those that you can really use and beg, borrow, and steal from in your fiction. And we can talk some about the fiction, nonfiction impulse if you want. I've written some nonfiction, but not much. I'm just one of those people, when I'm under kind of artistic, linguistic pressure, I'm going to go to a made up space rather than my own personal space. And I don't know why that is. I'm sure a good psychiatrist could help me out. But let's talk a little bit about Scribe. Scribe came out in the fall of 2018. It was written fairly quickly for me and was finished by December of 2014. So it's 5.5, the idea behind it is 5.5 years old now. It features, many people have called it a dystopia, which is not something I've ever done. Although if you grew up in the American South, everything feels like a dystopia to you. And that's been kind of my experience. And there's some reasons for that. This is set in a version of Appalachia post-war. We're not really sure which war it is. Probably is the Great Civil War, but the book's a little slippery. It's also, believe it or not, post-pandemic, post-epidemic. I stole from the historic fact of some measles explosions in certain parts of America in the 1880s that caused some real uproar and quarantine. Don't ask me. I think my fears come out in my fiction a lot of time ahead of time. The main character, I'm just going to read from the start of the novel, is a woman who lives alone, and she makes her living by bartering. And one of the things she can do is write letters. She has taught herself how to make paper by using old paper and repurposing it. She's literate, and most of the people in her life are not. And the South I grew up in, I'm old enough to remember when a lot of people didn't read and write, so they went to the preacher or the lawyer or the school teacher to have documents written for them. So I'm stealing from what I knew as a really little girl a little bit there. This woman, when the novel opens, a man has come and he's going to ask her to write a letter. So I'll just read the first 2 pages, then I'll skip forward a little bit to how they make their deal. And then we can talk a little bit about characters making deals in fiction. And those of you who have your story, your fairy tales front of mind will recognize some of these tropes, I think. So this is scribe. And if you want to go screen dark so you can snooze during this, no worries. Okay. The dogs circled the house all night, crying out, hunting. She knew they were calling to her, beckoning, working their churn. The world she lived in had become a gospel of disturbances, and the dogs wouldn't let her forget that. In the morning, before she'd even gone to the spring house for milk, she saw a man waiting at the foot of her garden. It was how they did. Summer had spun away from them all. The creek banks were whiskered with a nickel-shine frost, and she could smell the cooking fires laid down by the ones who called themselves the uninvited. Pig fat and smoke, scorched corn. There were more people at the camp every week, staking out tarps, drying fish seined from the river. They were drawn to her fields at the end of their seasonal migrations because of what had happened there some years before, because of their beliefs. She did not know if they planned to stay for the winter. The man's clothes were rust-rimmed and deflated. He wore a battered straw hat. Those who wanted something from her arrived at the brick house above the creek, the doctor's house they called it, a remnant from her father's time, and waited for her, always alone. She didn't care for ceremony, but ceremony was what they needed. Their silent arrival was part of a code they passed among themselves. It was the same for the Brubaker woman who prepared the bodies of the dead, and the man from Jack's Mountain who was known to hoard crystals of salt. The dogs began to gather, the swift brindle one, then the fawn bitch, then the rat catcher with its long shredded ears. There were only 3 this time, each bore fresh wounds. The fawn bitch, blood threaded in its eager saliva, leaned hard against her knees. It was a disrespectful habit, one that couldn't be tolerated. Animals and neighbors had to be taught their limits. She struck the bitch on the ribs with her staff. The bitch yelped and went to its haunches, but it didn't leave her. None of them did. She raised her palm and signaled to the man. "You are welcome at my home," she signed. "It's the time of barter and trade." The man showed neither a pistol nor a blade. He had put his weapons aside in order to make his plea. She herself had given up arms some time ago. Everyone knew who she was and what she had to offer. They understood she kept nothing in the brick house anyone would want to steal. He began to walk toward her, past the twine looped and snared around her plucked garden, past the skeletal stalks of her harvested corn. He was holding items outward for display, objects filched smoothly from his pockets. There was a stick of split wood and what might be a precious shrivel of tobacco. These were his offerings. "I seen you pulled a good crop of squash and beans," the man said. "I seen your vines. It's been a good year." "It has," she said carefully. "A good year. Are you thirsty?" "I ain't," the man said. "I've been down to your creek first thing. It's a good creek." "It can be," she said. "I have sweet spring water too. I can make you some tea." "No need," the man said, looking at the blind face of her house from under his hat. His eyes appeared to be sleep-sore and yearning. His feet scuffed the tangled grass. "I brung what they say you might take in payment. I come to ask if you will write me a letter." So he's coming to ask for a service, and in the true Appalachian way, at least how I grew up, they can't go forward until they share their personal histories. So they share their backstories for a couple of pages because that's how we do where I grew up. It makes waiting in line at the post office really long, by the way. But they get back to it, and he asks for a letter, and I'm just going to read to you her response, because I think this is, for me, part of what is at the essence of a story. If someone asks us to do something for them, we either say yes or no. But in a good story, the yes will have powerful consequences. And in a good story, the no will also have powerful consequences. So that's the kind of choice you have to come up for in a good story. And it doesn't have to be a life or death request. It can be a very small one. Like my sister coming and saying, "Hey, Can I live in your college dorm room for 10 days? That's not life or death, but it can prove to be transformative. So this is the scribe's response to the request for a letter, and then we'll talk a little bit about the exercise I want you to do. What he wanted was the hardest thing. He wanted a letter in the declarative style, and he wanted to be with her, at least on the grounds of her property, while she wrote it. Then he wanted what they rarely requested anymore. He wanted her to memorize the letter before the pair of them destroyed it forever. He would cut and stack the wood he'd promised before she began writing, if that was what she required. And he would camp by the creek, eating his own dried fruit and meat, but he wouldn't impose on her. He also wanted her to carry the letter to its destination. He wanted her to speak its words aloud in the presence of the person who needed to hear them most. He described the place she would have to go, where the letter would become his painful request for forgiveness. He had a name. It was a crossroads, far away. You're asking beyond my limits, she told him. I don't travel anymore. He looked at her with eyes the color of shed snakeskin. She could hear some kind of emotion emulsify itself in the tube of his throat. He seemed desperate. I got to do this, he said, gulping. I got to make this right. I'll give whatever you ask. At Snow Creek, they tell you walk all the way down to Tennessee or down to the lights of Richmond. I won't go to Richmond, she said. I won't go there ever again. What'll you take? He asked. I ain't got gold or a living child. I got nothing precious left to trade. She felt the old cruelty rise up in her as powerfully as a moontide. Her sister had begged too, hadn't she? And begging hadn't saved her sister's life or gotten her what she wanted. Her sister had believed in the generous giving of gifts, valuables handed to other people willy-nilly and free of expectation, when she should have put her faith in the cold logic of exchange. There is one thing you could do for me, she said, with the hard shape of her mouth. It's a rare deed, something men around here claim they have accomplished when they're swapping lies. It won't be easy. You'll probably fail. But I won't carry your letter to that crossroads for anything less. Okay, so thank you for tolerating that. That's from Scribe. And it also, if it sounds a little bit familiar, in my part of, oh, thank you. In my part of the world, the Jack Tales, which are the Jack and the Beanstalk, old, distorted, worn down versions of English and European fairy tales were brought over and then traded as currency for a long time. So when someone asks you to do something, asking them to do something even more enormous is sort of part of the storytelling patterns that you see in the mountains, at least when I grew up. So she, of course, asks him to fulfill a heroic feat, and guess what? He does it. So then she's really in the deep soup. So let's talk a little bit about your fiction then. Have you guys got, and I'm going to go to screen share. Do you guys have the exercise that Matt sent to you? Okay. Let me just put it up here. You're going to find out how. Lame I am. Okay. Can you guys see that all right? Give me a nod or a thumbs up. Thank you very much. Got that. So my friend Carolyn Shute, and I actually have a t-shirt hanging on my wall behind me that I hang on my door when I'm busy. It says, bother this writer, you'll be sorry. Carolyn Shute is one of the great American writers from the state of Maine, but she used to always say to me a million years ago, in a good story, someone always wants something badly. And if you leave here not remembering anything else, please remember that. Because I think it's true. And I drive my students crazy with it, but I still think it's true. So here's my way of how I want us to think about community today and how you can help me think about community, I hope. America is a nation of contradictions, and I say that affectionately. It's been that way from the start, right? All you have to do is go back and look at Thomas Paine, the Federalist Papers. Maybe some of you watched Hamilton this weekend, you know what I mean. And I think this is really true in the American West, particularly the white person's American West, where freedom is an attractive principle in the abstract, but freedom, which is the primacy of our individual actions or desires, is almost always in a complicated waltz with community. And to me, one of the most interesting things about the Intermountain West, and I'll include parts of Nebraska in that, is our communities are small, they're pretty fragile, they're very important. By fragile, I don't mean bad, I mean, but you got to tend to them to keep them going. Because of their size and the economic, demographic, other weather stresses on them. So as free as we are out here and as individualistic, at least as Wyomingites are, we are also constantly working within communities. And I define that as the rules that allow us to live and work together. In that second paragraph, you've already heard me say, stories help us make, maintain, and destroy communities. And I think you can apply this to families, faith communities, towns, counties, states, nations, any scope you want to do that with. And so for me, one of the things that's really good for storytelling is to test the boundaries of community. And it's one of the things I've been thinking about in the American West for a long time. So our prompt for today, and we'll spend about a half an hour on this with our screens dark, is identify a community you know well. And while I'm going through this, just think, because I'm going to ask a few of you to just throw ideas for communities out there to get people's brains going. Identify a community you know well. It can be fictional or real, and a lot of you are clearly read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi. I say, awesome, that's great. Some of you may be doing world building and some fiction of your own, so you have entire counties, Yoknapatawpha, or entire planets, Dune, that you're working in, so you already have these at your hand. Large or small, historical or contemporary, draft a very short scene, 1 to 2 pages, in which an outsider arrives unannounced and asks a community member to do something for them. The ask that you're working with can be really dramatic if that's what you want to do. Will you hide me from my enemies? And there are some great works of fiction and nonfiction that begin with a version of that ask, which is a perilous ask, and it makes a great one. But you can also, I would argue, make terrific fiction, particularly comic fiction, from very minor asks. Will you keep an eye on my 6-toed cat while I go into the store and get a milkshake? So it's not the size of the ask that makes the story, it's the urgency and intention behind it. So as you think about these asks, it can be large or small, but it needs to provoke a response of some kind in the community member. An acceptance, a refusal, or a, I'm going to think about it, that somehow will get you to the next point in your story. So even if the community member refuses the request, the desire behind it must be powerful enough to provoke a response, and that response should begin to strain the community member's comfortable relationship with the group they have up to this point belonged to without question. So that's what I'm going to ask you to think about. I'll use an example because I feel like I do this every month. I belong to a distaff book group. It's a wonderful group, but it adheres through, there are very few things that the 7 of us have in common. And at the second we step outside of those boundaries, discomfort starts to enter the conversation. Like, it's a great group, it's all women, it's a great group of laughing and stuff, but we have boundaries. And if you start asking about certain things or probing at certain things, the group starts to react in unpredictable ways. So these can be low stakes communities for you, but ones that have sort of rigid rules that hold them together. You'll need to quickly define 2 characters, the stranger and the insider. You'll probably need to use dialogue, although it's possible. Please prove me wrong. It's possible, because I think you could do a really good version of this without dialogue. But think most about what kind of ask, what kind of favor might launch a good story. And what makes a good story, by my definition, it's want. Someone wanting something, desire, desire, desire. Again, it's not wanting gold. It's not any better than wanting a milkshake. It's what will that person do to get that milkshake? That's the difference in driving a story deep into what I would call the complications that really tell us about human nature. So does that kind of make sense? You're doing this quickly. Don't expect it to be polished. Have fun with it. Make it comic if you want. Make it a planet, not Earth. Do some things that allow you to explore some spaces that maybe you didn't explore early today, if that makes sense. I just want to see your faces for a second. I can leave that up, and I will for the 30 minutes you're working. But what do you think? Who's come up with some communities they may or may not write about, but the kinds of communities that you're drawn to? Funny or not so funny? Virginia, I got a hand up. Thank you.
Do you mean community like a town or like a coffee shop in a town?
Great question. Does anybody want to take a shot at answering that? Because there's no right answer, of course. Ashley.
I think is any variety of community could be approached. It could be a state for that matter, you know, like Minnesota Vikings fan walks into a Packers bar. So whatever the community is, it has to like meet it at that community's gate, as it were.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So my longer answer would be all families are communities, even if they're non-nuclear. So the second someone of a different faith comes to knock on your door on a Saturday, which happens in Laramie a lot, and you go to answer the door and they ask to take your time, you've got space for a story. Okay? And so that's just 2 or 3 people. Or I suppose you can use cats and dogs as characters too, for heaven's sakes, horses and cattle. So it doesn't all have to be human. But it could also be a town. I mean, I don't know what you've seen community-wise. Some of you have been in this space. I mean, for me, we've been separate from each other, but we have some pretty big stuff, or it feels like big stuff, going on. And for me, the big issue is those of us who crave more than anything being face-to-face with our students and have done it for years probably are not going to be able to do that this fall. We want to, and we're trying to figure it out. So we're trying to redefine how we think about doing teaching. I think that we had a big debate. I don't know if this was true in Nebraska, big debate here about whether we should have fireworks over the 4th of July. Okay. So that's the opportunity of a citizen just walking into City Hall and saying, what the hey? So anybody else have questions about that? It could be either. It could be the town or the cafe. And cafes are great communities because you can't entirely control who's in them, but they do take on lives of their own. Same with bars, right? So any place, and Dinty is very smart about a million things, but any place where there's food or drink, you're going to get a communal feel. And then people are going to start to ask favors of one another. Faith communities, right? Often very porous, but also usually have rules that they operate by, large or small. That was just a big part of my life. And so I think about the flexibility of community when it's defined by faith, Christianity, or otherwise as being a very powerful dynamic in America. What else? My husband would say the 3 guys, the only 3 men in the world with whom he likes to go fishing, that would be a community for him. Mary?
I'm not probably going to be writing about this, but I was thinking in our small community, a lot of people want to come here. But one of the recent things that happened was a corporation, the Marriott, wanted to come here and put up a big facility, a very small, open, very valuable open space. And their ask, of course, went through all the procedures, but the community asked said, please don't. And it didn't work out very well, but yep.
Yep. So that's a great Western one. The resources. Yes, we have an enormous request for a big wind farm south of Laramie, and that has brought up every possible contradiction, right? Because down here in Laramie, we've been saying stop being so dependent on coal. Well, now we're going to have to put our windmills where our mouths are. But it raises it, and it also surprises you when you're talking about communities about strange bedfellows, right? So you can continue to get great fiction out of this. But I really just want you to think about how all the time in our lives we are negotiating, right? Those of you who have children or grandchildren, they ask for stuff a lot, right? And so we're constantly modulating those requests, saying yes, no, maybe, putting them off. And by doing so, we're building sort of narratives of how we think our households or families should work. And so I really think that this individual versus group dynamic, which is so human, is just almost never going to disappoint you if you're looking to energize a story. And an old mentor of mine, in the same way that I steal family stories, if he gets stuck, he just always has someone ask someone else for something, just to unstick his story. And it's often a little thing, but he also talks about how when he does that, he surprises himself. Character A asks character B for a chaste kiss on the cheek. And he sits down to write that, and then what happens next becomes utterly surprising even to him, because he's just shifted the focus of the story just enough to let that imagination get rolling again. Does that make sense? And it's one of the things I love about fiction is that it's generative. It's hard because it's the stuff you leave out. You have to learn to leave it out. Whereas I think those of you who write nonfiction, that stuff, that's just peering into the soul and really trying to pare away until you can build a particular truth out of your experience. And I think that's really, really hard work. With fiction, we can always swerve into another lane as long as we learn not to habitually swerve away from everything we fear. We have to care as writers, just like our characters. So first I want you to write about a character who cares, but we have to care. We either have to, something at issue has to be something we love, hate, fear, or wish for. If we don't have that dynamic working underneath our writing every day, stuff's going to be pretty flat, I think. So that's another thing I tell students. And I put that into saying that love is a big part of it. You come to this, usually, I did anyway, because I was a great reader. So playing with language and wanting to recreate that spell that books had recreated over me, that's not necessarily, an angst-ridden impulse at all. It's a joyful impulse, and we should never forget that playing with language at root is a joy. And I have to admit, that's been hard during the pandemic, but reading poetry reminds me of it every day. And that's been, because reading poetry is like singing for me, I think. Okay, other questions? Are you okay doing this? Do you think you can go off in 30 minutes and come up with something that you might be willing to share, at least the frame of the ask with everybody? Okay, all right. We're at 4:21, so got to do my math. 4:51, or my time, mountain time. Is that okay? All right, I'm going to stay nearby, so if anybody has a chat question, I'll keep an eye on the chat. I'm probably going to go get a glass of water. And I'm going to darken my screen, but I'll be around. See you in 30 minutes. Thank you. Okay, writers, anybody who's got their ears on, we're just about right at that time. There they are, they appear, they appear. Virginia, that looks like the perfect chair. I need that chair.
It is the perfect chair. My feet don't, it's wonderful.
Is there room for 2 or 3 of us to share that chair with you?
There would be if I were nice, but I'm not that nice.
Technically, we're all in her lap.
we all need a good writing spaces. I will say, I hope the quarantine has been good to people that way. Maybe it hasn't, but I'm already a badger by nature, and so being at home in my study is okay. But I do know a lot of writers who've had their spaces not so sacrosanct in the last few months, so that can be really hard. How are you guys doing? You can power through another 40 minutes or so? What do Nebraskans do at 5:30 in July? When this is over? Mow lawns, drink beer?
We melt.
That's one thing I gotta say. I do not envy you. Yeah, I see your fan going. I mean, it probably got to 80 here, but as you guys know, it's dry as a bone at 7,200 feet anyway. So welcome back. Are there any smiles? I see some furrowed brows for sure.
Well, Allison, I think we told everybody 4:51.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Shows
So
how
we
good
might,
my math
we might
is.
have a few people who won't be back.
Well, we won't go yet then. You guys want me to shut up? You want me to shut up and let you finish? Or does anybody want to ask questions while we wait?
Some of them are nodding.
Okay, well, ask questions if you want. We'll just stay engaged, but get ready. I'm not gonna, no one has to share if they don't want to, but I would love for many of you to read first half page or at least describe the community and the ask that you came up with. So ask yourself if you're willing to do that. Thanks, Matt. You're better than I am. I'm even in the right time zone and didn't get it right. Well, if anybody has questions they want for the group or me, type them into chat while we wait. If anybody wants to talk about the Minnesota Vikings more, we can do that. Oh, God. Where's Carla? Speaking out loud is okay. Sorry, I wear a lot of hats at the university, and one of them is athletics representative, and we just got a big national piece of news for international students, so my phone is blowing up. Yeah, I don't know where. I don't know. I should math how many international students you may have at Chadron. We have quite a few here.
We have quite a few. Is this about the online canceling their status, their visa status?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So there's a little panic up the road from me. But Carla, you got a writing question?
Yeah, I just, I've been keeping a dream journal, and I think there's so many really interesting ideas for stories that come out of that. And so anyway, the idea that came into my mind for The Stranger Comes to Town is actually structured on one of my dreams. I always thought it'd be great to write a story about. So it's a weird thing where it's really based a lot on nonfiction, you know, like the basis of the story happened in my real life. But then of course this dream sequence, which also really happened in my real life. It's just yeah, crazy. So anyway.
No, I'm curious. One of the things I often ask students, I mean, how many of you, so I do not keep a daily journal. Does anybody else keep a dream journal? Which I think is, I do take notes from my dreams because they're so freaking weird. Yeah. Anybody else? A little bit? Do you keep it by your bed so that you could just do it like this? Take the note or write it down. It's kind of like your William Stafford writing your poem in the morning before you get out of bed.
Yeah, and I can't say I write it every day, but if I don't remember my dreams every day either, but if I'm woken up in the middle of a dream, I tend to remember. And if the dream is significant enough or scary enough or whatever, I'll also tend to wake up and remember.
Okay.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One a writer once said to me, and I actually had to order this book, and I think it came from one of the big libraries, but Carl Jung's The Red Book, which is basically his version of a dream journal. And she was like, you need to look at this. And it is one of the weirdest texts I've ever taken a look at. Just reminded me how odd things are. How many of you journal regularly? Okay, good for you. Good for you. I keep a notebook with me all the time. It's out of reach right now. And it's a little bit along the line of Dinty, what he said. I try to make note of something every day that I haven't seen, smelled, tasted, felt before, so that I just kind of am cataloging lightly in the back of my head, so that I'm just sort of collecting details on a regular basis. No surprise to you guys who live out in this part of the world, but the landscape and its inhabitants is just so remarkable to someone who didn't grow up out here that it's just, I feel like a gift every time I walk outside of my house. So I kind of want to try to record that. And I'm a very place-based writer. And again, I don't really know why that is. Well, I think I sort of know why. I grew up on a farm, so it was a lot more place than people. And a farm by, I should say, Virginia Blue Ridge Mountain standards, which would not meet Nebraska standards. 200 acres, 50 cow-calf pairs. So, it barely registers for you guys. Okay. Any other questions before we gin up for our last 40 minutes or so? Okay, so let's think about community. Who's got, maybe I'm gonna pick, Carla, I could pick on you since you started the ball. Are you willing to be picked on? So you tell us just a little bit about that ask, or why, what came to mind? What'd you work with?
Okay, well, the
Oops.
community, the setting, I don't even have really pages written yet. But the community is it's a party. It's a house party. My boyfriend had drowned about a year or two prior. And so the party is with my friends, his family, my 2 kids, and now my new current boyfriend.
Ooh,
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, enough said.
Right. And then the stranger, which this is a little bit of a twist on it too, is the stranger is my dead boyfriend. And he comes back and he's a stranger in that he's completely gray and he's obviously dead. And I'm the one who can see him. And so he comes into this party and you know, and I have this sense that my new boyfriend can see him. And so really the ask is he right away wants a kiss, and then he also wants to be brought into the fold and be a part of my life, into my current life. But no one else can really see him, although I have a sense that Doug kind of can, the new boyfriend kind of can. And so that's his ask, and my ask is basically, can he remain hidden? Can he only show up to me in private? And so that's all I've gotten so far.
So that's plenty. And, you know, I could tell from this morning that you guys were well beyond rank beginners, but I think one of the things, and it's okay if you didn't do this because simple storytelling is very powerful, but what you've already done is even in just your telling, there are 3, what I would call complications that are really helpful. One is we've got these multiple families, relationships from the get-go. Then we've got the miniature ask, the big ask, can I stay for a while? And then your response. And I think there are so many other possibilities of stories, things that will keep the characters from resolving the ask quickly, either in a comic or a tragic way, just in the way you frame that. So you complicated it right away. And I think one of the things when I'm working with younger or emerging writers is it can be hard to give yourself permission to make a mess or complicate things in the way of real life. But if you get to that point where you can start to do that with your fiction, sometimes you'll have to weed it out. You'll have too much going on if it's a short story, but it's still important to remember that, this is my take, everything you invite into the story doesn't have to be fully resolved. But the more complications and layers and subtext you can provide, if you have at least one to go under the main asks, you're in good shape. And one of the things that when I was reading to you from Scribe, he's asking for a letter and she's responding, but the subtext that's under there is that her sister has died, and you get a mention of that. It shows up in their other stories. And so you've already asked the reader to pay attention to 2 things, and you've asked the reader to sort of begin to think about paying attention to 3 things. And that's the best fiction, if you can pull it off, is fiction that asks us to answer more than one question, even if it's short. Even in 3 pages, you can do that. So thank you. Anybody else? I don't know what you eat or drink before you go to sleep. Maybe I don't want to know. But that's pretty vivid. Okay, I saw a hand. Ashy, thank you.
Going for the whole unmute button. Okay. So to summarize, because I never get where I want to go as quickly as I can. I always have to make sure to bullet it. So the bullets are, the community is an estranged family. So it's a family unit that has long since fallen apart. And then the ask is that of these 2 remaining family members, one, a daughter who's like, I don't know the ages yet, but they're both very old women, but there's a mother and a daughter, and there are only 2 left in their family. And the mother, who the daughter still resents, asks her to write memoirs for her. She's the only one that she'll let write them, and if she doesn't, then they won't exist at all, and her memory will fade in however many ways. So the ask is that the daughter write the memoirs, and the risk is that she have to like hear her mother all the way out for all the things that she resents her for and that kind of thing.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
So I have like 2 paragraphs.
Okay, great. Bring it on.
Hers was a broken, fading family, once extensive and what Piper would have called highly diverse for all its children carrying maiden and misbegotten names. But all of Piper's immediate family, anyone who would remember the schism, she remembered out loud. That's what she'd entitled it, a nickname to file it away under that wouldn't hurt to recall, that wouldn't hurt as much as the break she'd had to make with her mother all those years ago. For the few stray invitations she'd received to attend funerals of her extended and immediate family, she had never heard of her mother's death. Piper's resentment burned on like a lighthouse in the dim edges of her mind. Still, after however many years, I haven't decided yet. She was still scared, and she still watched out for her.
Yep. Very nicely done. So again, complication, and you don't have to have it. Family wouldn't have to be broken, and you wouldn't necessarily have to have a time limit, but both of those turn the screws on the ask, and you just did that instinctively. I want to ask you a process question, because I'm really interested. Can you tell us a little bit about how you bullet when you're planning your writing?
So it's been a weird, loose, instinctive thing that I've always done, because like I just drug up the first things I ever tried to write seriously from when I was like maybe 10. And I realized I did it even then, but if there's main things that I want to happen or like main points that I just can't forget, I'll put like a keyword down or a little buzzword that'll strike up not just what I was trying to do, but how I felt at that moment and like a context for that situation. Because then I can remember so much more if I can remember just the keyword. And so the bullets are really useful for me that way. But in this case, I bulleted the community, the ask, and like what the risk was basically. And yeah, so I don't know if that answered your question, but I hope
No,
so.
it does. And I think, again, if it's instinct for you, but I would say when I'm working on, well, short and long fiction, if I can leave a tag at the end of my day's work, often handwritten, so that I can pick it up the next day, I know I've got something. It just helps me keep my momentum going. So I'm always love to find out how other people do things. And that sounds,
say
in
that,
fact, you've been doing it since you were 10 is amazing to me.
I mean,
Great.
it wasn't refined by any means, but learning how to actually take useful notes in college and learning how to outline ridiculous technical research papers, all of that helps me do the same thing.
Very good. Very cool. Thank you. I got Virginia volunteered on chat.
Oh.
So anybody else?
Okay.
Oh, I got Joanne. I see your hand up for next, if that's okay. So Virginia, go ahead. Then we'll go to Joanne.
Mine is, the setting is a very cluttered and crowded airport with one frazzled traveler looking for a specific coffee shop. And her question first is asked at a courtesy desk, you know, where's the closest of this brand of coffee shop? And they send her on a long goose chase throughout the entire airport and she can't find it. So she comes back, you know, frazzled. All she wants is a cup of coffee. And so she goes into the first store she comes to off the concourse and says, where can I find Caribou coffee? And she's in a Starbucks.
No, no.
So you
Good.
can see how
Yeah.
that would have dire consequences for her.
No, I think you've fallen into the pattern, which is a great one, which is hurdles, right? The classic story structure of someone wants something and they have to get over at least 3 hurdles, you know, whether it's Hercules or Virginia. And so you've already created that pattern that can help turn the screw on the ask. So even though it's a air quote minor ask, you can get a great story out of it because the hurdles will, you know, just provide complication. They could provide risk. I mean, most comedies are built that way, right? I am no comic expert, but the best comedy is just all about the hurdles. So do you know what's gonna, you got any idea what the Starbucks people are gonna do to a Caribou fan?
They're gonna throw stuff at her.
Hopefully nothing hot and steamy.
No.
Okay. be thinking about that next hurdle. And some of you may be good genre writers too, but if you were a romance writer, some hunky person is likely to come along. You know, if you're another kind of genre writer, some other knight in shining armor will come in, wander into the story to ostensibly help her out and only make things worse probably, but very good impulse. Thank you. Joanne.
Okay, mine is about two friends who have been friends in the past, but now they're pretty much strangers just because of time and circumstances. And the setting is a farm community. Kathy had spent the last 12 hours in the car driving home from a solo camping trip to the mountains and decided at the last minute to swing by to see her old high school friend, Jenny. Jenny had been one of her best friends, but they had grown apart over the years, mostly due to distance and because they didn't really have much in common anymore besides their roots and were more or less strangers. She had only seen Jenny a handful of times since she was invited to her wedding shortly after Jenny had finished her physical therapy residency. Jenny had met a local farmer who had grown up, eldest of 10 children, in a tight-knit Catholic community near to where Jenny worked. She had converted to Catholicism, married the farmer, had 6 children, while Kathy had stayed single, footloose, and fancy-free. Jenny and her husband lived on his family's farm, and her life was busy commuting to town to her PT job, keeping the farm finances in the black, schlepping her children to the local Catholic school, church auxiliary events, and school fundraisers. For the first several years, they had exchanged holidays letters, where Kathy learned all about the kids, their volleyball and basketball feats and 4-H accomplishments, summer camps, ups and downs of farming, and later as the kids left home and there was more money, the purchase of a boat and weekends enjoying the cabin at the lake. They in turn learned about Kathy's many solo globetrotting adventures. It was starting to get dark and Kathy had another 8 hours to go before she got home. And Kathy was secretly hoping that Jenny would invite her to spend the night. Finally, after Jenny didn't offer, Kathy did the ask to see if it was possible to pitch her tent in the yard for the night, although she was really ready for a bed. There was an uncomfortable silence that lasted a bit too long. Finally, after Jenny had pondered the request for what seemed like an inordinate amount of time, in fact, Kathy was a bit confused and wondered if Jenny had heard her, because if Jenny had asked her this question, she would have immediately said yes and tried to fit Jenny, her husband, and 6 children into her 2-bedroom apartment. Finally, Jenny turned to her and said, "I'm sorry, Kathy. I have to work tonight, and I'm not going to leave you alone with my husband."
Okay, very nicely done. You know these characters really well. I can just tell after a couple of pages, and that is such an ace in the hole. And right, it's a great dynamic. An old friend, you have a shared history, and oh my gosh, stuff has changed. So do you think you'll keep going with it?
Oh, that's it.
Come on, I need to know. I need to know. Yeah, the other thing is people growing apart, which I think we had a whiff of in one of the previous ones, is also great terrain. And also in chat, I think Ashley's saying family members who hold grudges, that's a whole different subgenre for fiction, a really good one. You should make up your own writing exercise for that. But thank you. Thank you for that, Joanne, because I think it's the history the 2 characters have that gives that such power, and that you know that. And I would say indulge in that in the right way as a writer is really, really powerful. Thank you. I got a request from Meg to go next. Meg, where are you on my screen?
I'm right here. So my setting is a mining town. I know this because I lived in 3 of them, or 2, or too many. The one who's going to be asked a favor is a single woman in her 40s. She owns the local tavern and she's also the bartender there. This is a town where generations 3 and 4 generations of families have lived there. Okay, so she's closing up shop for the night. Last call, the regulars began to shove their chairs out from behind old wooden tables. Good night, Joni. Steve waved good night. See you tomorrow. Hey, how about one more pour? Over here, bartender. Joni didn't recognize the stranger. He stood out from the local miners in his white linen suit, tight-fitting t-shirt, Italian loafers, seemingly tall and lanky. Joni wondered if maybe he was a vegan or a vegetarian. A horn blew in the distance. Shift change at the mine. What are you drinking tonight, Jameson? Neat? You got it. Thanks. Is it Joni? Yes, that's right. She twisted off the cap at Jameson and poured the amber-colored liquor into a clean rocks glass. He looked at her. I need one more thing. Oh, what's that? You know, the kitchen's closed. We're not serving dinner anymore. No. I need a favor. Well, don't know if I can help you there, but there's lots of good folks here. We all take care of one another, so if I can't figure it out, maybe one of them can. No, I need you to do the favor, only you. But he interrupted her. I need a key, Joni. I need a key to the old Harper house. The Harper house? You mean Jillian Harper? She's been dead for 5 years. What business do you have with the house? Sit down and I'll tell you more. He patted the leather seat next to him, and Joni slid in across it from him on the table. But I can't tell you what business I have, but there's something in it for you. A key, really? What have I got to do with the Harper house? He ran his fingers through his dark hair, silver strands caught in the late day sun. Joni studied his face, wondered when he'd last cleaned his glasses, and noticed the lapels on his jacket were frayed. Anyway, he's got some dirt on her.
Yeah, that's
She
fantastic.
doesn't know that. She doesn't know him.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good example of a sort of basic community we're all familiar with, that
So
dynamic
that's all I got.
are and how welcoming they are. And then you have a particular character coming in acting a particular favor, but the flavor of threat and history underneath that really powers it up. Really nicely done. I'm dying to find out. You're gonna have to finish writing it and sending it to me, please. I need to know. So well done. I got a hand up by Lillian. Thank you.
I haven't done my request part yet. I'm still building up to it, but can I read what I have?
You absolutely may. Thank you.
Alea peered out of the dusty window at the gradually darkening sky. Rain was coming. Good. The garden had been suffering in the heat. Every year the heat came just as Alea planted. She told herself this year would be different. This year she'd succeed. Ding dong, sang the doorbell. Sighing, Alea turned away from the window as the first raindrops landed with a splat. Who on earth would come here in the middle of a brewing storm?
That's good. That's good. Do you know what the ask is?
Not yet. I'm still thinking about it.
Okay, because so I don't know, and I'd welcome comments from anybody else, but what you did there with mood and atmosphere to prepare us for tension, for some sort of disruption, but also to let us to know that the world is on the edge of a kind of turmoil, right? garden, drought, rain, storm. So you're just with the fewest number of words really preparing us for disruption. You know, and all good stories are disruptions. They don't all have to be uncomfortable, but they're changes. So nicely done. I'm dying to know what's going next. Thank you. Somebody else? Thank you. Jessica.
Sure. So I cheated a little bit. I wrote nonfiction, but
cheating is always allowed. No rules. I only have one rule. You have to read like a crazy person. That's my only rule.
All right. So I don't have all the sort of level of detail that I would put into a fiction piece yet, but this is sort of the skeleton. And the reason the story interested me is that it just came up a few days ago, and it falls into a longer tradition of these types of stories. So I'll tell you more. I won't give away the ending here. The phone rang towards the end of my shift, so I knew which observer was calling. Miss Jessica, it's Pat. Of course it's Pat. You're the one that gives me the river reading 4 hours after I issued the forecast, and then you complain that my forecast sucks. What can I do for you, Pat? Well, I can't help it. Don't get no cell service till I get back from the fish wheel. I know, Pat. You also butt dialed me yesterday and left a 30-minute message last night. Ha! That's funny. What did my butt have to say? Not much, Pat. How high is the river today, my friend? 14.6 from the marker. Yukon River at Tanana is 14.6. Entered in the database. Thanks. What else is happening in the village today? Oh, we're having a good stick storm. Nice. I'm hearing that up and down the river. Do you go fishing for some firewood? I did. Got me some nice tall trees from the headwaters. I'll let it dry out for a year. Sure burns nicer than the scrawny shit around here. Excellent. Oh yeah, and we got a Russian trying to get home. Really? Tell me more. Well, the poor bastard is just trying to get home. Ain't nobody gonna give him a ride nowhere. The natives are scared, of course, with the pandemic and all. Not surprised about that, Pat. A lot of ugly history there. And that tuberculosis sanitarium there in Tanana especially. Yep, my wife lost half her family growing up. That's hard, Pat. What are you gonna do? Are you gonna help him? Well, that guy just wants to get back home, but the tribe is raising money to put him on the next plane out of here. What are you gonna do, Pat? Well, I took him aside. I told him, look, I'm a white guy, but I've been here 55 years, and I don't think anyone wants to have anything to do with you. I asked him where he came from. He said New Jersey. Can you believe that? He hitchhiked from New Jersey. I can, Pat. It's been done. Can you give the guy a canoe? I'm thinking about it. Then what? He'll attempt at crossing, wait for winter, and then walk across? Call Putin from Nome? Call our senators. Get the State Department involved. That guy's gonna die making a crossing in a canoe. And if he makes it, then what? He's in Siberia. That's a long ways from nowhere. I know. Pat, I want to hear the next chapter tomorrow. Okay, bye.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, no kidding. So, yeah, do you feel like you need to stick to the truth? I'm just curious.
Not really. I've been totally fascinated with this tradition of stories about Russians coming up to Alaska trying to get home to Siberia. And it goes back to the first, well, in written form at least, and this would be like more like European Russians, the indigenous people of Chukotka and Beringia go back and forth, but people who are trying to like get back to European Russia via Alaska, either from walking or hitchhiking. And there's a woman who supposedly did it as they were building that telegraph, and all kinds of rumors about what happened to her and whether she swam across, and then a couple of historic novels that were written. One historic novel, another one of a woman who tried to retrace her steps. So it's kind of an interesting story. And I guess one of the plays I was trying to make was a little bit like who's making the ask? Is it you know, the Russian guy's asking to try to get home. He's asking for help from the people in the villages down the Yukon River, but I'm also kind of asking him to help because I know he can. And not that I think that this guy should canoe across the Bering Strait, but if he could get himself to the end of the Yukon and then over to Nome, he could probably get a charter across. So that's my day job. There's a million good stories, and I don't have to make stuff up, but I could.
So I had no idea about that. You guys got my mind aflame now, because that's just such a perfect quest that could just go wrong so many ways. And I hadn't thought about the ask within the ask. So that's a very cool twist. I mean, I'll try to steal that with attribution from you, because that, yeah, I mean, what that potentially allows things to do, as my old friend and mentor Charlie Baxter said, is a really good piece of short fiction will always have one arrow that's pointing in the other direction. Like there's a lot to be said about arc and resolution, you know, conflict and resolution and some other things that happen in good fiction. But he said that really the best stuff has always got a cross current running the other way. And one of the ways to do that is to have a narrator within a narrator, or to do what you just did, where you've got competing asks. And so that's very nicely done. And now I got to find those historic. If you know the title of those novels, type them in, please. That'd be great. I'd love to know more about that. Okay. I've got Brenda is willing to go next. Thank you very much.
Okay, how is my connection? Okay, thanks you guys. I'm gonna read off my phone, that way if it's not good, you guys can just yell at me. So I felt that I had to read this time because during Dinty Moore's, I wrote 5 pages of notes and got nothing that I could present, and I was like, this is horrid. And so I decided this time I wasn't gonna think I was just gonna write for the entire 30 minutes, no matter who was talking in the background. I was just like this. So here's what came out, is an ask about going fishing. Just listen, Dad. It was a perfect thing to say. 10 days ago, when Paul's son had come to live with them again, Paul vowed to use this surprise, this gift of time, to reconnect with his son, to really listen. Of course, the circumstance could have been better. Caleb was here because of the pandemic. Just my luck, Paul had thought at first. His son only wanted to stay with him because he couldn't stand the idea of being quarantined with his stepfather, Jim. Ugh. When Caleb had decided at the beginning of his sophomore year of high school that he wanted to live with his mom and stepdad, Paul had been disappointed but understood. His ex-wife Lucy worked all the time. Caleb would have the entire basement of Lucy and Jim's brand new house all to himself. Jim and Lucy had a home gym. Jim and Lucy went to the lake every Saturday. Jim and Lucy were looking at buying a boat. Jim and Lucy ate out 4 times a week. Jim and Lucy said Caleb could attend the new $4 million high school, which they argued they'd pay for anyway with their tax money. Paul had decided right away not to take Caleb's change of residency personally. Heck, he would like a home gym and a speedboat. So Caleb went and Paul stayed in their 2-person cabin alone. In the beginning, things had been a bit strange, too quiet without the sloppy movements of a growing teenage boy bumping around in the small space. The hardest transition was dinner time, what to cook for one. So after the first month, Paul decided to skip dinner. Instead, he would grab a chocolate chip protein bar and a Bud Light. and wandered down to the shop to tinker with the project list he had made one night early on when he was still trying to make a meal and eat it at the dinner table. He had learned fast to establish new routines rather than try to live the old ones. He now read books before bed, books about Teddy Roosevelt or Wild Bill Hitchcock or Chief Standing Bear, new environmentalists that his brother, a biologist at CU Boulder, mentioned. The new routines were good, and he was content. Besides, he still had his red heeler, Birch, to talk to if things got too quiet. But now Caleb was back. And of course, the routines had changed again. Caleb had come for a scheduled long weekend in mid-March. Rumblings about school closing and the virus they had known was far away. In China, maybe? Seemed to be creeping ever closer. On the drive back to Jim and Lucy's, Paul had asked where Caleb planned to live if a stay-at-home order was issued. Without missing a beat, Caleb had said, "With you." At first, Paul had been surprised, then curious. Why with me? Why not stay in the basement at Mom's? Caleb had rattled off a list of reasons why I wanted to be at his dad's. It's in the woods. There's no temptation to go out with friends. You have weapons. We could grow our own food. The list went on and on like this. Paul acknowledged that Caleb had thought this through, and he agreed to let his son move back. Lucy took it well. Jim had been very angry. Caleb came anyway. And now here he was, almost a man, besides that baby face, strong, intelligent, capable, asking Paul to listen. He only wanted to go fishing with a friend during an infectious outbreak.
I muted myself because my dog has made a reappearance. Great backstory on that. Really, really strong investment. And a nice writer's trick there, which several of you guys have done. So keep this in mind. The quick start, just listen, Dad, like the hook right away, and then looping back. So just wait, just give me, I promise you it's going to be worth your listening. And then coming back full circle to it, proving that you can alleviate our desire to know, and then we'll listen. We'll go through more loops with you if you have a narrator who's given to digression. Once you prove that you can tell a nice story within a story, and sort of, I call it sort of like crocheting or purling your way through the narrative. So nicely done. And I gotta say, yeah, adult children coming back, particularly if they're imperfect, always worth a story. So thank you very much. Somebody else? Abigail, thank you. And then Brad.
There we go. All right. So, yeah, my situation is a medieval town of misfits, and character one is a forcibly retired seamstress, and then character two, who comes to ask, is a young boy slave asking the seamstress to sew a dress for his mistress. So, Carissa hauled up another bucket of muddy water. The rain she had been feeling in her knuckles better fall soon, else she would be forced to the deeper village well. Oh well, the mud would settle soon enough. She picked up the bucket, fingers stiff around the handle, still unable to close properly. They hadn't worked right since 7 years ago, the breaking. She could do almost everything she needed to now, after years of adjusting. Sure, she had been a little sloppy with the paint across her hut, but no one really cared. Anyway, at least she had paint. Lady Carissa? The question seemed to fall from the sky, and the messenger boy would have fit in just as well there. He wore a purple velvet vest with pants the color and texture of soft green leaves from deep in the forest. But the fine, white linen undershirt couldn't hide the iron band around his neck. He knelt down in the dust, trousers turning brown, and held out his hands. A sliver of silver glinted in the palms. Carissa dropped the bucket. Dark brown spread across the dirt, turning dust to mud. No. She walked back to the hut. He followed, knees brown with dust. Please, my mistress. She looked at him. His clothes were finer than anyone she'd seen in 7 years, but his eyes, she knew them well. The blue was different, but the same defeated look was everywhere in the village. What's your name? He seemed surprised, shocked even. Tate, son of Andon. He sensed her hesitation and took advantage. Please, will you sew my mistress a gown? He put the silver needle in her fingers. She hadn't held one since she had been thrown out of the palace, her knuckles broken and bleeding. She handed the needle back. His face fell. He turned slowly, heading for the door. Wait. He stopped in the doorway. Tate, a son of Andon, I will not make your mistress a gown of any kind. I cannot. She held up her hands. However, if she is willing, I will take it upon myself to train her slave, Tate, son of Andon, in the ways of the needle. Perhaps then he will no longer be just a messenger and toy of her every whim.
Nicely done, nicely done. So another dynamic we haven't talked about yet, someone who's more powerful asking someone less powerful, or vice versa, right? You get an automatic sort of amping up. I use the word powerful loosely, but in this case, you made it clear from the get-go. Abigail, got to ask about your world building. Is this a new place to you, or a world you spent some time in as a fiction writer?
This specific village is, I think maybe it's in the same, maybe a different side of a world that I've written in before, but this village is new.
Okay, because there's just a real confidence, a real propulsive sense of who does what, and a real, at least for me, hint of menace that may play itself out from the get-go. And you set that up by saying she was a involuntarily retired seamstress, I think. So nicely done. I feel like there are going to be more asks in this world of yours. Okay, Brad?
All right, well, I took Brenda's approach and just started writing. So since we're running a little bit short on time, let me just start reading. It was Wednesday morning, so I was down at Pigs in a Blanket, the local pancake house, with Mel and Tanner. We had long since finished our breakfast of sausage and pancakes and were lingering over our bottomless cups of coffee. A young woman came in with a boy in tow, about 8 years old. Candace went over and set down menus and some crayons and asked if they'd like to start off with something to drink. I'm ready to order, said the woman. I'll take coffee and bring Ryan a short stack of pancakes and some orange juice. Candace took the menus back with her and returned shortly with coffee and juice. The boy picked up the blue crayon and started coloring the placemat. When Candace came back with a plate of pancakes, he moved the placemat out of the way so we could keep coloring as he started to eat. Will there be anything else? Asked Candace. The woman got up and pressed a $10 bill into Candace's hand. I need to run an errand real quick. I'll be back to get my change, said the woman. You stay right here, she said to the boy. I'll be back before you can finish those pancakes. The woman was heading out the door as Candace was objecting. Hey, this isn't a daycare center, she said, but the bell on the door had already jingled. She went to the door and thought about chasing the woman down, but decided to just hope for the best. The boy ate the pancakes methodically as he continued to color. The juice and the pancakes and the coloring were all finished at about the same time. Mel let things go for a few minutes before he felt that he had to say something. Is that your mom? He asked. Where'd she go? She had to pick something up. Is she going to be back soon? I sure hope so, said the boy, staring down. Mel wasn't sure what to say next, which really wasn't like Mel, but before he could work out the next step, the boy looked up. Hey, mister, could you tell me a story? He asked. Mel was a bit surprised, and he paused before answering. Why, sure, son, he said. Let me tell you a story about when the three of us were about your age. And that's as far as I got.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, again, really not. You guys are killing it this afternoon, which is pretty impressive given how intense your morning was. So that's one of those where it seems like the world is a normal, recognizable place. And then we get an ask, and then now we're going to get a story within a story. So way to turn the screw, way to amp it up, way to draw us in, Brad. I'm dying to know how these stories end. It is time, so if anybody wants to share in the chat just while Matt and Stephen are making final comments, either what their asks are or any questions or book titles, please feel free to do that. Yeah, you guys have been tremendous, working hard today, but really, really powerful, intense, and energetic responses. I mean, you've all launched really strong stories. And I don't even know if they're going to be short or long or middle length. It doesn't really matter. You've just built a lot of momentum in that first page and a half. So very impressive. Thank you. Matt, where are you on my screen?
I'm just trying to figure out how all these stories are going to end, and endings in my own mind in my own bizarre way. Well, thank you so much, Alyson. I really appreciate that exercise. I was working on some stuff in the office here too. I got a scene out of that, so seems to have been pretty productive. Okay, well, I'm guessing that we want to wrap up now, right? Everybody's probably pretty tired. So I will just go through some closing remarks that have to do mostly with acknowledgments and promotional items. So everybody can hear me okay? We all right? Okay. So so we probably first need to thank, well, we'll want to thank the Mari Sandoz Heritage Society, but first I wanted to talk a little bit about my institution, Chadron State College. They did allow us to use their Zoom platform, and it seemed to work pretty seamlessly once we got the technology sorted out this morning. And they do support us every year with vehicles and copies and stuff like that. And our English department has really been supportive of the writing workshop over the years. And so I have to take a moment to promote our wares, so to speak. The CSC Writing Program has kind of grown and evolved with Storycatcher over the years. We first started doing Storycatcher in 2012. And I think Steve has joined us. I finally let him in. He was in the waiting room for a long time. But he joined our creative writing program in 2014, I think it was. And then if you go to our website, storycatcherworkshop.org, there's an archive of all our previous workshops. And I think 2015 is where you start to see Steve's imprint quite a bit. We went through his Rolodex and just started leaning on all his associates and contacts. And so we've had a stellar cast of writers come and help host these workshops. And Dinty Moore was the last of this long line of people that he'd worked with. So I really appreciate him bringing those contacts into our sphere, into our orbit. And also our program at Chadron State College, for those of you who have kids or grandkids, or those of you, I think we had 3 or 4 students on the workshop Zoom meeting today. Our creative writing program has been growing at Chadron State College, and we did get a creative writing major approved just this last year. It takes a while to work through the system, as I'm sure Alyson is familiar with. And so we hope to be able to offer that major in the next year or two. But if you know anybody who wants to major in writing, we have a pretty good program here at Chadron State College in both literature and writing, and we certainly encourage people to reach out to us if you have questions, or you could ask Ashley or Abigail or some of the other people that were on the Zoom meeting today. And if anybody wants to further, I know after writing workshops, oftentimes people will want to sort of, they've made some connections and you might want to reach out and obviously you can use the chat feature here. You can privately chat with each other if you want to grab somebody's email to begin a correspondence, but you can also reach out to me and I will act as middleman and ask if somebody is willing to give their email out to somebody else. So just reach out to me. My email address is on the conference program. And so just as way of promotion, I thought I'll try and share my screen see if I can work this out here. I got the pages loaded. This is for our website for Chadron State College English and Humanities. And our blog has a, I think everybody can probably see that. Our blog has a announcement from November of 2018 when we changed our logo and our marketing sort of idea was we now are find your story. We want all our students to find their story at Chadron State College. And part of that, I think, is both in the reading and writing programs that we offer, but also thinking ahead to my acknowledgments that will go to the Mari Sandoz Heritage Society. There's a picture up on your screen here of when we had Frank X. Walker on campus, packed the house for that. And the Sandoz Society has been able to provide funding for a lot of these things. They provided funding for the Sand Hills road trip that Steve and Brad Modlin, who was in on the earlier sessions as well, worked out, which was a really great program before the coronavirus sort of made that go south a little bit. So anyway, there's a lot of really interesting things and energy that's built around the contributions from the Sandoz Society in partnership with our program. And I also want to thank Steve. It's kind of a bittersweet. Is Steve on I'm going to stop screen sharing. Is Steve out there? Where's Steve? Steve, where are you at?
I am here, Matt.
Oh, there's Steve.
I'm one of the little boxes.
There you are. Steve. So Steve has been instrumental in planning and helping with the workshop growth over the years, as I've already mentioned. And sadly, Steve is going on to other pastures. I won't say better pastures, or greener pastures, but he's going to be teaching at Western Colorado University in Gunnison next year. Well, in a couple weeks, actually. None of us know what teaching is going to look like when we go back in the fall. But so we're excited for Steve, but we're sad to see him departing our program. But he's been very generous about, well, I think Steve can tell you this himself, but he's been impressed with what we've been able to do with the writing workshop and the energy and the resources through the Sandoz Society. And so we're really hoping to continue our partnership. And Steve joined the board, the Sandoz board. 2 weeks ago, we had a board meeting, and he joined the board, and there was only a couple of very strenuous objections to him joining the board. So it was nearly unanimous for Steve. But they're quite excited to perhaps have some partnerships with Western in the future. And I can speak to that a little bit about our plans for next year here in just a moment. But I just wanted to thank Steve for all he's done to help. So I will give Steve a round of applause, and also make him continue to help us for the foreseeable future from Gunnison and in Chadron.
Thank you, Matt. I wasn't, my wife and I weren't sure if we're going to take the job. So Matt's acting like he's the one that told me to take the job. I wasn't going to take it. So, if this doesn't work out, once again, we all know Matt's to blame. So this is a recurring theme in our program since I got here. But I'll miss working with you a lot, Matt. But I'm excited because I do think Storycatcher is going to continue, and you'll talk more about ways in which we'll work Western's program into that as well. For those students out there, Western has an MFA program. It's a low-res program that is doing some really interesting things. They have some particular niches that are really, really interesting, like environmental writing. In fact, Matt's wife, Brenda, will be starting up there in the next week, right, Brenda? So a lot of exciting things, and I will definitely miss Chadron State College. I was so proud of our students today.
Yeah.
Their level of discourse is quite impressive. So I see Abigail's face right there.
Yeah.
So gonna definitely miss some of these students that we've had such a wonderful time working with. But great things are happening. And Ashley, you're still out here too, another great student. So keep up the good work, and thanks for everything, Matt. And Matt does Storycatcher, everybody. So he talks about my contacts. That's about all I do. Matt does everything, so he's the one that gets all the round of applause I think that we should be clapping for. So maybe we can do that for Matt. So thank you, Matt.
Okay.
Steve, can we still blame him for everything though?
Every night before I go to bed, Brenda, I say, thanks, Matt.
I believe that. Well, Well, I do think it's exciting that if we can have some partnership going on, because I think the programs are somewhat similar in that Western has that sort of environmental focus as well in some aspects. And I think there's some good, I hate to use the word synergy, but let's work on that.
Well, not to talk too much shop either, Matt. I think if we pool financial resources, we can do a lot of great things. It's stronger, you know, you can do a lot more with those financial resources when you pool with these small institutions. So side conversation. Sorry, everybody.
So anyway, the Sandoz Society being willing to suffer with Steve on the board and all that, we know that they are willing to take one for the team. But the Pilster Endowment is what funds this every year. And when we had our board meeting a couple weeks ago, they were everybody's just super sad that we weren't able to gather face to face. And they were very interested to see how this would maybe go off today on the Zoom. And it seems to have worked pretty well. And what I'll do is I'll send an email survey out to you all afterwards and sometime this week. And if you can give us some feedback on what worked and what didn't work, it could be that this is something that we also add into the mix for future workshops, whether we're social distancing or not. You know, like I mentioned, Sandoz has funded the visiting writers on our campus. They've done a lot for us. So I would encourage you, if you find it in your heart, to join the society. I think everybody who signed up this year automatically got rolled into the spam folder or whatever for the Mari Sandoz Society. I think membership is $50 a year. But I also think that I try to do this at times when I've had the microphone at these conferences. I can't always do it successfully, but Mari Sandoz, whatever you think about her as a writer, she was a dogged writer, and she didn't feel that she had always the most natural talent, and maybe some readers will agree with that sometimes, but just the fact that she took those shots, she shot big, she was looking for sort of subject matter that was huge, and she had this huge encompassing sort of spirit of what she wanted to write about, both fiction, nonfiction, history, the letters that she wrote. She was an activist. She would very much be a part of this movement that's going on right now for trying to sort of change our society. I believe that. And you can find clips of her online. I was going to try and play one, but I'm worried about the bandwidth. If you just search Mari Sandoz, Nebraska Educational Television, you know, in the early 60s, she was doing writing workshops, lunchtime writing workshops through the Nebraska ETV, and they have some of those tapes preserved, and they're quite interesting. And the story she just tells about, you know, we have another writer in Nebraska. Her name's Willa Cather. Maybe you've heard about her. I attended the virtual Willa Cather workshop a couple weeks ago where they had Alex Ross from the New Yorker, and I don't think former First Lady Laura Bush was there this time, but you know, they have some big hitters there because Cather, you know, she's a pretty good writer. But I think as far as that tenacity that is maybe part of our landscape and part of what the story catcher spirit is, and what I think we saw reflected in the writing that people shared today, I just really, it always makes me feel so happy to have this happen every year and just to meet everybody and hear their stories. And scrappy, I think, is the word that I like to use. And she used her writing to really confront and to interrogate and to challenge what was going on in her day. And I think, again, I think she would rise to the occasion if she were here now. And she was a very generous writing instructor and writing teacher. So in some ways, I think that she is the perfect sort of model for our writing workshop. So in the fall, the Sandoz Conference, which is also paid by this Pilster Endowment, they've had some really wonderful conferences the last few years. Last year, we were in Estes Park at Western Literature when they had their conference, and it focused on her short works, I think, from Hostels and Friendlies. I don't know if everybody can see this. This is another book I might recommend for writers because there's a lot in there about when they put the collection together, what her writing process was like, how she evolved as this writer. You kind of see her works in progress. You see fiction, you see nonfiction. So anyway, the conference in the fall, I would be remiss if I didn't promote this, although I don't think they have the dates worked out. It generally happens in October, November, and of course they traditionally have had this on campus, and they have quite a bit of funding, and they try to bring a fairly big name speaker, oftentimes a historian or a cultural historian or somebody like that, to come speak. And that's the Pilster lecture. And then they have a series of conference sessions around the theme. And it's been great to bring these speakers and scholars on campus. And I think they've done a great job the last several years. This year, they're going to be doing it online. It's going to be a virtual conference taking place over 2 days, as far as I understand it. And the theme has to do with immigration, which is timely. I do have a description. Panel A, the Pilster lecture panel. The working title is Immigration into Mari Sandoz's Country. And then panel B, I think, which will be on a separate day, the symposium panel, working title, Immigration into Sandoz Country. And the idea, I believe, is going to be streamed live, or you have to register, but it's free, is my understanding, to get the Zoom password and all that. And then I believe it will be recorded and then made available at some point. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about that, but that's about all the information I have. But if you're on our mailing list, which you all are on if you're in the Zoom meeting, you will be hearing more about that probably in the future. And then some final thoughts about Storycatcher for next year. We're recording many of the sessions today. I think we recorded all the session with Alyson. I should probably ask, if you do not want your reading to be shared out to a select group of people, you should probably let me know and I can edit it out of the tape.
No, no worries.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if anybody has any issues with that, but we'll try and make that recording available. And a couple people had asked about that before the workshop began because they couldn't make it today. And so that will be made available on our mailing list, which again, I think most of you should be on. And for the Mari Sandoz Heritage Society, that link will be made available. And I think it will be, the server here will house the video. And then for Storycatcher 2021, which will be our 10th anniversary, we hope to replicate much of the planned programming that took place, that would have taken place starting today through Wednesday at Chadron State Park. And our original program is posted online. I think most of you have seen that, so you can still go and look at that and see what we sort of had in mind. So next year, we're hoping we'll be able to gather face-to-face in those facilities, and we've already reserved them. So I guess this is a save the date announcement. Monday, June 14th through Thursday, June 17th. We've added a day to the original program, and I'm sure the programming will evolve, and we don't know how many of the participants that were slated for this year, how many of the workshop leaders will be able to make it, but I think we might be able to bring most of them back if they're interested. And we're going to add an extra day, or we're not sure how it's going to be scheduled for sure yet, but in those block of days, we have at least an email commitment to have some folks from the Western Colorado University program come and visit our part of the world and hold some sessions on that day. I don't know if there'll be advanced sessions. I don't know all, but just watch the email for details. But those dates are important, so keep those in mind. We've already reserved the rooms, and if we're unable to meet face-to-face, we'll do something like we did today, but this has been kind of a proof of concept. So I'm guessing we would probably expand it and do it over several days. The registration fees will probably go up a little bit. We may use the Whova app or one of these, these conferencing applications that seem to work pretty well. So all that to be worked out, but we just want to put a marker down for that second week in June and just have it on your radar. And we really hope that everybody will be able to join us out here in the Pines. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, that's all I have. Anybody else have anything to add? We all want to go get some dinner and get some rest after all this hard work. Well, thank you all for attending Storycatcher at Home. Have a safe summer, and we hope to see you next year in the Pines. Bye, everybody.